On the Day of Goodwill, we are reminded of the high levels of poverty in South Africa. The reality of being the world's most unequal country is that, beyond statistics, millions of South Africans go to bed on empty stomachs with no help in sight. Good evening, my name is Sizwe Mpofu Walsh, and welcome to Unfiltered. While some people are on the state's social service system, many more remain outside and have to fend for themselves, as the multiple state programs meant to bridge the gap remain unreachable. NGOs often complain of inadequate funding, while billions are allocated yearly in social assistance for indigent South Africans. Tonight we ask, how caring is the South African state? Let's welcome our guests, Chief Executive Officer of the South African Red Cross Society, Molefi Dagalo, and virtually, we're joined by the Funding Director for Helping Hands, Yasrab Shah, as well as Lead Consultant on Knowledge and Specialized Research Projects, Charities Aid Foundation, Southern Africa. We have invited the Department of Social Development, but they couldn't join us. Remember to comment on X using @Unfiltered SABC. But first, let's take a look at this insert produced by Andrew Mokhatle.
The festive season is a time for celebration for many families who come together and share meals. But for others, it is a reminder of their deprivation, where finding a decent meal is a daily struggle.
One of my granddaughters was doing grade 12 and she had to drop out because of hunger. She could not afford to go to school on empty stomach. She's now out of school, and here I am staying with Asipe. She's doing grade 11. Today is not at school because she's hungry.
Sometimes I go to school hungry. When I get to school, I have to wait until 11 to get food from the feeding scheme nutrition. When I come back home, there is no food.
A sobering moment to pause and ask, where do these children, relying on the school's feeding scheme, get food when schools are closed, such as during this festive season? Around 19 million South Africans depend on the social grants system, but many more remain outside of the system for various reasons. Recently, in 3 different incidents, mothers killed themselves and their children, reportedly due to hunger, in the Eastern Cape, South Africa's poorest province. It is in the same province that the Human Rights Commission inquiry also revealed that between 2021 and 2022, at least 116 children died of acute malnutrition.
We don't think that this number is anything close to being relevant anymore. The inquiry was held last year, and even in July this year, the Minister of Health indicated that severe acute malnutrition cases have increased with 26%.
These are extreme cases of desperation amidst hopelessness, a microcosm of the South African society, where hunger and poverty are stuck and persistent features of many families in the country. The Social Development Department receives billions annually to provide a social security net for these struggling families, but some non-governmental organizations complain that the funding is inadequate and sometimes poor infrastructure hampers the ability to reach far-flung areas where intervention is desperately needed. Last year, the department underspent on its budget nationally by 1.8 billion rand. Celebrated every year on the 26th of December, the Day of Goodwill in South Africa is a holiday and a day off for those who are lucky to have jobs. It is meant for the sharing of love and peace, but in reality, for many families, these are yet to be realized. Andrew Mokhatle, Unfiltered, SABC News.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. I'm joined by guests from Muslim Hands, the Red Cross Society, as well as the Charities Foundation of Southern Africa. And if I could begin with you, Mr. Dagalo. Of course, in this period, South Africans are often celebrating with family but it's a very difficult time for those South Africans who are facing the brunt of poverty, hunger, destitution. Can you first just take us into what you see on the ground as relates to the scale of suffering in South Africa, especially at this moment in the year?
Look, I think in your introduction you captured it quite well when you gave a reflection of the general scenario in this country. And it's a reflection, honestly, of what our society generally is going through. It's not just only happening around the festive season period. It happens right throughout the year. That's what you've seen, and I'm sure you must have observed. And I think the viewers at home will also appreciate the fact that the issue of poverty and hunger characterizes our society. We are a volunteer-based organization, and we are pretty much found in every corner in this country. And our volunteers are basically, coming from these communities. And we even have volunteers that are also suffering the same fate. So they're not spared from hunger and poverty. And it really is very much appalling. It's a heartbreaking situation that you find in communities. And of course, we'll talk later about our interventions as an organization with regard to trying and minimize on the impact of poverty and hunger that we're seeing in communities out there. But it really is very scary. It's something that you don't want to walk in day in and out. But because it's something that is facing us, we have to face it head on and try and assist where possible.
It's so interesting to hear that on the one hand, we're facing these terrible crises of hunger, of poverty, but even those who are volunteers themselves are in a difficult position and have to give of themselves, even in a tough situation, to help those who are in an even more difficult situation.
No, true. And it tells you how desperate the situation really is. And I'm sure in your introduction, you also gave an indication of this huge outcry by the NGOs with regard to insufficient funding from whomsoever. And this is why there's always a call that we are making, that not just only government, because I think the biggest mistake that we are making is to try and look at government for every help. And we have worked with government departments our whole lives, and we know that it's highly impossible for government to cater for all of these needs in society. This is why there's a need for us as NGOs to play a role of supporting government where necessary, but also seeking support from communities, because there can be individual community members and families and groups, as well as business, that can play a role in trying to fund NGOs whilst they are busy trying to support government in their duties.
Indeed. Mr. Shah, could I come to you in terms of Muslim Hands? Just also give us a sense of what you see on the ground and how dire the situation is in South Africa. I'm mindful that we've been through a pandemic, we've just been through a bout of serious load shedding, and on the ground in the toughest communities, are you witnessing things getting worse?
And thank you for having Muslim Hands on. Absolutely, I think. The global crisis, the COVID epidemic made the situation globally worse. We're a Muslim Hands family that, we're operating in many countries around the world. And of course, we're proud of the fact that we established our office in South Africa in 1996. And yes, sadly, we're seeing increased levels of poverty. Our teams on the ground, they're having to do incredible work. And yeah, I'd like to just highlight that what's been mentioned already, the poverty, the hunger rates that we're seeing, and even, coupled with the unemployment rates. I think the last reported figures were 41.2% of the population. And we can point out even at the very poor illiteracy rate. There was an international study which even pointed towards that 8 out of 10 children struggle to even read by the age of 10. So, and I think your report earlier did allude to this as well, that something around about 18.2 million people in South Africa, sadly, are living on less than $1.90 per day. So it is an incredibly challenging landscape. We are, of course, trying our best. Our funding comes very much from the goodwill of our South African donors, as well as our international fundraising officers around the world, and we're completely reliant on that. We do not receive any government grants, sadly, at this point, but obviously that's something we will need to do in order to expand our work. And our focus has been very much around providing food security in the form of food parcels and hot meals. And honestly, it's heartbreaking to see your opening report that we're hearing of mothers, especially in rural areas around South Africa, taking their own lives because they simply cannot afford to feed themselves and their families. I mean, that's just incredibly upsetting to say the least. You know, Muslim Hands, of course, is active in South Africa, but we work in many countries around the world, and sadly, this is what we do see. You know, what I would say regarding that is, you know, I'm going to use a Chinese word for crisis. They say J, and we means a crisis, and G means opportunity. So, you know, we're faced with incredible amounts of crises around South Africa, but it's an opportunity for people of goodwill, of generosity, the philanthropists, to come forward and to dig deep. And we're very incredibly grateful to our donor base across South Africa, who really, without their help, these are individuals like you and I, who from their hard earnings and everybody is struggling, as you said, even the volunteers themselves are struggling. You know, they're digging deep, especially post-COVID, to still care for vulnerable people in their society. And our message really would be one of we desperately need them to continue to provide that fight, that struggle against these huge levels of poverty that we're seeing across South Africa. But we do it with you know. It's very easy, you know, when we go into these rural areas and around the world, when you see these high levels of poverty, that you almost lose hope. But the hope is actually in our supporters, our donor base, that without their donations, we simply wouldn't be able to continue our work and help to protect and save lives in South Africa as well as worldwide. And
right.
You know, yeah, go ahead.
Let me bring in Mr. Omar there on that important point made by Mr. Shah. Of course, you have an interesting insight into the fundraising landscape. You help organizations reach out for assistance. What can you tell us in terms of the South African and Southern African perspective that you're seeing on the ground? Is the situation getting worse? And are we in some ways blind to just how dire things have become?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me for this occasion. So I think South Africa, there is no hope lost, because the country, well, I come from CAF Southern Africa, which is Charities Aid Foundation Southern Africa chapter. And as you know, CAF is interested in understanding the generosity of the whole globe. So our last study shows that Southern Africa are quite generous and actually plays in a bigger role in terms of the generosity compared to the globe, the whole world. And so I think an organization like Charities Aid and among other players in the sector have this as a leverage, because as much as we are suffering, the spirit of Ubuntu is always hovering around us, and that our generosity can be used as a positive, positive move to help us bridge this gap, because already we know that the funding models and the government assistance is not always going to be adequate to help us solve all these problems. So I think the power is in the hands of the people, and maybe through these organizations like CAF Southern Africa, to help them bridge that, that resource gap that we already have. It might be in minute, in negligent, forms or quantities, but you see the resources pulled together, especially with the love of Ubuntu of South Africa, then we are able to solve some of this problem. So I believe that using the generosity that already exists in the country, if we are able to channel that in a more, a strategic way, then we are able to alleviate some of the anger that we see around, because already the data is telling us that we are capable of doing that, as a population by ourselves.
Indeed. And we'll come back after the break on some of these questions and also see what role the state can play in forwarding and strengthening the efforts and interventions of NGOs on the front lines of poverty, hunger, and destitution in our country. Stick with us. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. I'm in conversation with a series of NGOs on this Day of Goodwill as we inquire into what the situation is with those South Africans who are still facing poverty. And as we celebrate, and many of us are experiencing our holiday period, it's important to remember that there are still many in our country suffering, and we're asking how we can alleviate that suffering. Mr. Dagalo, let's come on to the state and the role, especially of the Department of Social Development. There were stories earlier this year, especially in Gauteng, about NGOs who were due for payments from the department, but those payments came late, and that resulted in an interruption of their ability to deliver to people. Can we talk about the Department of Social Development? What's it doing right? What's it doing wrong? And especially this funding crisis that seems to be engulfing the department.
Okay, no, thanks, Dr. Mpofu. Look, I think it was out there. It's common cause that NGOs, particularly in Gauteng, went to march at the offices of the Department of Social Development here in Johannesburg. And I'm sure the department would have come and explain themselves on that one.
Indeed,
but
and just to remind viewers, we did invite them.
You did invite them, yes. Look, I can attest to that. I come from the NGO sector, and I know that we were also affected by that. I mean, it's a practice with the Department of Social Development where you don't get your funding well on time. And I'm sure if there were going to be many other NGOs in this studio, they were going to be echoing the same sentiments. And I hope it's something that the department will be correcting. But it's been something that has been happening for years, and I don't see it coming to an end anytime soon. I don't know what the problems are in that department now, but what I can tell you is we know for a fact that government budgets have been cut hugely subsequent to the pandemic. But I'm sure you would know there's a history behind the budget cuts from the 2008 economic downturn globally that ultimately affected even us. And I'm sure you would recall that the credit ratings agencies have been rating us on a junk status, I don't know how many times. So as a country, we can never be spared from all of these global problems that are actually characterizing the countries all around the world. But I've also worked for government. I was once at social development, and I know that the problems that are happening currently have been there even during my time, and they were even predating some of us who got appointed in the department a while ago.
What were some of the challenges that you saw from that vantage point?
No. When we were there, the problem has always been, because I'm sure you would know that budgets are centralized in provinces. So I worked in a district, and we would do all the administrative work and send information to the provincial department for the processing and the ultimate payment, because budgets do not sit in the district or even in the local offices where you might find some of these government officials. So the problem, there's just too much red tape in government. You go through so many signatures before you get to the ultimate authority for them to ultimately release payments. So it's actually a matter of inefficiency. There's high levels of inefficiencies in government, and the levels of effectiveness, but also the fact that, when you talk to government officials, if they were here, they were going to attest. Their salaries are guaranteed. Taxpayers are actually ensuring that they get to be paid. So then in some other instances, you find people who are highly insensitive, who are not even bothered by the delays or anything of that nature, because it doesn't affect them directly.
Indeed. And Mr. Omar, you made an interesting comment about the relative contribution in Southern Africa and how that's actually higher than in many other places in the world. What about government and the state? Do you think that the South African government is doing enough? We see and hear these stories of serious administrative problems in the payments that are already supposed to be made. How do you understand the state's role in the front lines of poverty alleviation, and is it working?
Thank you. Generally, in the general economies, the state's role is mostly to provide a conducive environment for these other state actors or the sectors in the society to thrive well. So I think South African government, what should be happening mostly is to allow these other players to to thrive, to have a situation in which they can be innovative and creative to solve these problems that we face. So from my end, without leading so much on what the state has done and not has done, I think there are many creative ways that the sector itself has to think of. There are huge partnerships that the sector can, the non-profit sector can enter into the government and even the private sector in order to look for solutions that are affecting the country. We have to understand that generally the state is not going to be the solutions provider. The state already has so many to deal with. And these issues, they keep on, as much as they are state's responsibility, they keep on spiraling up and growing up and again. So I think our sector, in the non-profit sector where I consult, we really have to be very creative in having even sometimes leading the government on how to proffer some of these solutions, which I call the PPP, the public, private, and philanthropy partnership, in order to get the solutions. And there are so many models already available that the state can use. There is one example that I recently gleaned on when I was in a conference in Cape Town, where the government and the private sector, using innovative financing system like social impact bonds, approach a solution from the private sector's lens. And private sector, whenever there is wealth creation available, they are always very meticulous on the way some of these solutions are proffered and how the whole process is run. So I think state inefficiency is something that has been established all over the world, and we are not going to change it overnight. We just have to be very creative on the way we approach how the state can provide that enabling environment for us, to the sector and actually the whole three sectors in the society, to be able to provide all the solutions that our communities need.
And Mr. Shah, how do you respond to that with some of your global experience? Of course, Muslim Hands is in many different countries. What kinds of successes have you seen in partnerships between the state and the NGO sector that South Africa could look at and replicate? And have you had any trouble with the state in South Africa? You say you haven't got funding from them, but have you had any trouble with the way you've had to deal with the state in South Africa?
No, I wouldn't say that we've had any trouble dealing with the state of South Africa. It's actually, we see this as an opportunity, God willing, moving forward. That's something that Muslim Hands South Africa will be looking to strengthen their ties with the government and actually apply for government grants. But from our understanding of the issues that are facing the Social Development Department, I think it's one of a fiscal issue in that the department is not sufficiently and adequately resourced, which obviously means that the coordination and the funding that it can actually give to the NGOs and the NPOs is limited, with something like around about, I believe, 47% of the South African population that is relying on social grants themselves. What we're seeing in South Africa, sadly, is repeated globally across the world, and I do agree with the previous gentleman. We've got to be creative and look at private-public partnerships. That is something that Muslim Hands, as a faith-based organization globally, is looking to do in South Africa, as well as different places around the world. And yes, this is harnessing the expertise of the private sector and of course our goodwill ambassadors, as well as our supporters and donors worldwide, to join hands with their governments on the ground. And we have effectively been able to do this. I can point a model where Muslim Hands South Africa is looking to fund projects within Yemen, which is one of the worst humanitarian crises on planet Earth, where Muslim Hands has successfully been able to run public-private partnerships with many of the cities in Aden in the south, as well as in Maghreb in the north, where we're providing huge water schemes that are going to provide safe water to millions of people. So there is a model that we've seen that is working in parts like Yemen, and I think that's something, one thing as a Muslim Hands family we try to do is take the learning points and the developments of our various fundraising offices, as well as our programs offices across the world, and take that good practice. And of course, that's something we're very much looking forward to expanding within South Africa as well. We see tremendous opportunities to do that. But of course, we are at this point very much reliant on our supporters and donor base in South Africa as well as globally. And of course, we hope to strengthen our ties with the department itself. In the hope that we're able to benefit more people, especially in rural areas where we're seeing extreme hunger and poverty. We are a faith-based organization, inspired by the Islamic faith, and very much at the heart of that, the DNA of that is one that we must provide for others to feed others. We're actually reminded by God in the Noble Quran that وَلَا يُحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ, that a sign of a very poor believer, and in fact a very hypocritical believer, is one who doesn't even encourage people to feed the poor. So our message very much to our supporters and our donor base in South Africa as well as across the globe is that as we feed ourselves, we must feed others. And no doubt one of the greatest challenges we're facing in South Africa is the huge levels of poverty as well as hunger. But we hope alongside our supporters and donors that we're up for that challenge.
We're in conversation with a series of practitioners in the NGO space around the ability of South Africa to meet the challenge of poverty, which continues to creep upward and is a real shame on our nation. How do we resolve the challenges of hunger and poverty that play out in these festive periods? We'll be back after the break with more. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing the Day of Goodwill and South Africa's attempts to combat poverty, especially on the front lines of the most affected areas in our society. As we celebrate and enjoy the festive period, we recall that many South Africans are not in a position to enjoy those benefits. Mr. Shah, can we double click on this question of food security and hunger? Because this is still a major problem in South Africa, sadly. Can you give us some insights into how this problem plays out in South Africa, maybe in your experience around the world, and what efforts can be put in place and are needed at this moment to address this particular crisis?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it is a heart-wrenching and devastating. We across South Africa as well as in many countries across the world. What we're witnessing, our teams on the ground are witnessing across South Africa, especially in the rural areas, are extreme hunger and poverty. It is, from what we can see, especially post-COVID, sadly getting worse. But not just in South Africa, but also globally. Ourselves, we're a family of fundraising officers around the world, including in South Africa. And we face something of an existential threat. To be honest, during COVID, I think back to the memories in 2020, and I'm sure our colleagues on Zoom as well as in the studio will say the same, that we had huge concerns that our own supporters and our donors around the world, as well as in South Africa, would be facing their own challenges and their own problems, and we were genuinely concerned that our funding globally would go on the degree. So I want to give you some light at the end of the tunnel. Actually, we found during the COVID years, we saw incredible, groundbreaking amounts of money that were raised for incredibly good causes. And our priority, especially in South Africa, is focusing in on open kitchens. This is providing emergency food parcels as well as hot meals. And this is an opportunity for us to reach out to those rural communities across South Africa, as well as in different parts of the world. But, and this is really a commendation for humanity actually during COVID, and especially I would say in the Western countries where there was a genuine concern people would stop funding but actually we found record-breaking amounts of money raised. We're also focusing in on rural school feeding programs in South Africa as well. This is incredibly important. We found this in South Africa and also one of the neighboring countries of Malawi, that children are sadly turning up to school malnutrition and genuinely hungry and starving. For them to even concentrate in school is near impossible. We had scare stories from our teams in South Africa and around the world where people would say to us that the children were incredibly eager to come back in on a Monday morning back to school, and part of the reason for that is they sadly reported they had not eaten at all during the weekend. We have others, well, I think now hear of cases in Yemen. Again, this is why we're focusing on the school feeding program in South Africa and worldwide, that people are even when children are sick and unwell to attend the school. We have stories of family members or parents themselves coming to the school to receive the school meal. This is an indicator of the level of desperation that people are facing, that even when the child is unwell, they still don't want that child to miss out on that school meal, meaning they have nothing to feed their child at home. That's the message. And so we've been trying to encourage our donor base, our supporter base in South Africa, as well as worldwide, to really focus on our Food for Kids program. So this is the school feeding program, as well as these emergency food parcels in rural areas in South Africa.
Right. And Mr. Dagalo, what's your view on what can be done to alleviate this problem? Hunger is just the first basic necessity, and we still haven't got it right in South Africa. Can you give us a view on this particular crisis?
No, look, I honestly would wish for our government to devise means, because I'm sure, and I want to go back to the point I was making earlier on about, the role of government and the funding and everything that goes with it. And I want to agree with the other speakers that there's also over-reliance by NGOs on government funding.
Sure.
In the NGO sector, you almost get a sense that people do not want to think of anything else except to go to government and look for money there. But also, fast forward to the current situation. Look, and also, I agree. There's a need for us to have a creative ways of trying to raise funds. But also, the environment has to be such that it's enabling for NGOs to find creative ways of generating money. But look at the economic situation in the country. It's not going to be easy for our government to create that environment unless they find other creative ways. But also, the one biggest problem we are doing is we are basically being reactive. This whole thing of us giving people food parcels and soup kitchens and things that we are doing, hot meals, we are just scratching the surface. We are dealing with the symptoms. It's like giving somebody tissue when the person has got flu, and you're hoping that by wiping off the nose, then the flu will just disappear. There has got to be a very serious investment in developmental programs, things that can be sustainable in the long run. I mean, you can give food parcels now. If people are going to run out of food parcels now, what's going to happen the next morning? I just don't think there's enough efforts to invest in programs that are going to ensure that there is sustainability moving forward. So I'm hoping there will be ways through which our government in particular, because it has to be an institution that provides an enabling environment for other people to find it easy to function within that particular space.
Absolutely. And Mr. Omar, your thoughts on anything that has been said in terms of this question of hunger? It's so important because, if we can't get this right, then so much, just can't happen if people are just too hungry to thrive and succeed and look for work. Your thoughts on this question of hunger and how the sector can address it?
Oh, thank you so much. Food insecurity has many manifestations, and the impact can be large. I mean, can spiral into many other components that affect the society in general. So because we know that an hungry stomach cannot concentrate especially for the kids to be in class, to be productive. So I think of this thing, especially if we have to look in the solution angle, I think of it in maybe three parts. One, I will mention that there is always going to be the collaboration or partnership, between the three main players in our society. That's the government, the private sector, and also our sector, which is the philanthropic or the non-profit sector. So there are moments where we have emergency, and so we have to activate our emergency solutions. So, for instance, when there was flood in KZN, CAF Southern Africa, in collaboration with the provincial government and also with SASOL, were able to come in swiftly and address the anger problem that was created instantly by the flooding. But that's on emergency situation.
Sure.
But we also have what I call the intermediate. Already, when we have people who are hungry, we have to look for solutions like soup kitchens. We cannot wish them away. In terms of immediate to intermediate solutions, we can also think of hot meals. But it has to run over time, and then it stopped, and then we begin to think of longer term solutions. And here is where I keep on saying that the partnership that the government creates with both private sector and also our sector will help, because in this way we are able to create specialization where people are trained on certain sectors in the society. Perhaps those who are specialized in agriculture are there to do, even though as much they may be doing their small scale farming, but it's able to help them to solve their hunger situation. In the shorter to long term. And at the same time, we have people who are trained in other components of the society in order to solve this the hunger and because it's not just only hunger, it's hunger and poverty, so that we have a holistic society which is able to proffer their own solutions to their own problems. So I think I'll still maintain that there has to be a component of all these sectors coming together, and there has to be a component of looking into this problem from the immediate, which in many cases are emergency situations, and into the immediate that's going to feed them maybe in a year or two. But then in longer term, how now we need to create specialization where people specialize in many economic enabling systems to help the society to move forward. And that one is going to be enabled mostly when these sectors come together to be creative in the way the resource is mobilized, and also in the way the societies, our mindset is tuned to be able to be producers, not just to be consumers. So that the solution is solved to the logical end. It will take time, but I believe that the evidence is already suggesting that when the three sectors come together and they use innovative and creative models of providing these solutions, then we are in the right path. And I think they are already, like I was saying, what CAF South Africa did. There are already models that have already that can be seen on how this is taking place. So
indeed,
I believe
we will come back on that, Mr. Omar, after the break, because when we do come back from the break, we're going to look at the way forward, ask what are the longest levers that can be pulled to address these questions. So stick with Unfiltered as we ask also what you as a citizen can do to help the organizations in philanthropy and the non-governmental sector on the front lines of poverty and hunger at this time of our festive period. Stick with us, don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Unfiltered. On this period of the festive season and in terms of the Day of Goodwill, we're speaking with a series of voices from the NGO and philanthropic sectors about how South Africa, in the spirit of goodwill, can alleviate the crisis of poverty, including hunger and destitution in our country. We're going to touch on some of the solutions that we can reach in the future. Mr. Dagalo, what can people watching this do in terms of the spirit of the Day of Goodwill, in terms of the spirit of Ubuntu, which has been mentioned? Many people out there want to help, but they aren't always sure where to invest the money for the greatest return. What would your suggestions be, and what kinds of projects that you have been involved in would be worthy of such an investment?
No, thanks very much, Dr. Pofu. Look, the easiest way of people who would love to make a contribution and they don't know where to go, the easiest way for them would be to go to websites. I mean, if you punch in the South African Red Cross Society, you'll find a plethora of bank accounts and cell phone numbers or telephone numbers which you can call. And obviously, when you reach those kinds of organizations, you can then get people who might direct you with regard to how you should be making a contribution. So the call that we will make is for people not just to open NGOs, because there's also a huge tendency of whenever there's a challenge, everybody wants to open an NGO. And this is the problem that is facing government, where there's just a plethora of NGOs and government does not know whom to fund. And it becomes a problem. So instead of reinventing the wheel, go look out for organizations that are already in existence and provide support in that regard. But also people can also organize themselves and make a contribution. And the call that we will make is for private sector in particular, because I honestly don't have a sense that the private sector, people that are actually, making money out of all of these people that we're talking of, I'm talking the poor and the destitute who are supporting these businesses. I don't think I have a sense that the private sector is making sufficient investment in that regard. But also, moving forward, of course, maybe private sector might also want to claim that they don't know where to go whenever they want to make a contribution. But I think the biggest contribution that can be made, because the issue of poverty and hunger, it's just a manifestation of the problem that's bubbling beneath the surface. I mean, if you're sitting in a society where there's high levels of illiteracy, there's also high levels of unemployment, and we talk of an enabling environment. How do you expect people who are unemployed in townships and in villages to get together and do anything when they can't do anything for themselves? So the starting point should not be about building food gardens and food security. That's something that can come once proper investment has been made. But of course, in trying to curb hunger in particular, that should be the investment in the interim. But that's an interim measure. It's something that you do now to try and curb the current problem that you are facing. But long term, there has got to be investment in making sure that people are getting education. Ultimately, they get into the employment sector for them to get together and try and minimize on this particular impact. We live in communities. I'm not theorizing about poverty. I've lived poverty. I live among people that facing poverty and hunger. We're not talking from high air-conditioned offices. We have volunteers in every corner of this country. We have volunteers living amongst communities. And the fact that we know what is going on the ground and we have lived this experience, it actually inspires us to want to do more in terms of trying to assist with regard to minimizing on the impact of this particular hunger problem. So there's a plethora of projects. I can list quite a lot of them. We are basically handing out food hampers like everybody else. We are running large food soup kitchens around communities where there's a need for us to do that. We respond to emergencies and disaster. I'm sure you would know the South African Red Cross. Everybody who lives in this world would know that organization. So we live amongst communities. And hence I'm saying if you want to reach out and you want to provide assistance, come to us or go to any other organization, because there's quite a few of us that are existing in communities there. Go and make a contribution there, because they already have a database. They know who are the people that are in need of all of these kinds of services, and they can direct your interventions in that regard.
Mr. Omar, on the same theme, what is working in South Africa and in Southern Africa where people who might be donors, whether large private donors or individuals, can safely invest their money in the knowledge that it will have an impact on the lives of those who are suffering most?
Yeah, thank you once again. Like I mentioned, it's good to look at this. To also stop looking at it from a theoretical perspective, but to also look at it from a knowledge perspective, where we expect to be investing on longer term solutions for these problems. So I think in South Africa, especially if I glean on COVID-19, there were solutions that were provided directly and immediately by our society. So for instance, we know that the collaboration that I keep on talking about, the retail giving in South Africa is picking up tremendously. And during COVID-19, you saw that in many occasions you walk into maybe a store and then there is a basket there that after buying one or two of your items, you may prefer to buy, two more or another one and then keep it there. And I mean, the studies already showed that most of these were able to reach the intended, the recipients that needed them. Another thing that I think the previous speaker gleaned on was about, finding a way to, to source funds or to source resources in a sort of a crowd. So crowdfunding, obviously, and it's in many forms. I mean, Stockville is a crowdfunding, but it's more for investment or for organized group. So these are solutions that already exist within our society or our communities, but there must be a way of channeling them. I usually believe that we need to engage the research and data analysis, things like monitoring and evaluating what's already working, so that our decision, is data driven and our decision is scientific. Because we know we cannot run away as much as we want from science and the solutions that have been tested, elsewhere and also within our community. So I believe that there is still chance for knowledge sharing to play part. We have to, in terms of the supply chain, because we know that when the supply chain of food production breaks down, then there is a huge impact on the society, and this one is mostly created especially during crisis. So we have to find innovative solutions and ensuring that those supply chains remain intact or alternative chains are developed, especially during crisis. And we do have to talk about infrastructure development in that manner. So there are the plethora of things, like the previous speaker says, but I believe that there is always going to be a solution when the three sectors come together to think of these things in a more scientific manner or in a more sustainable manner, so that we find some longer lasting solutions to this problem. Thank you.
And Mr. Shah, your thoughts, what is working that we should be doubling down on, increasing investments in, and can you also offer your thoughts on how people can feel safe about the accountability once they have given money to NGOs, and what they should be looking out for to make sure that those contributions do reach the destinations for which they're intended?
Thank you so much, Sizwe. Really appreciate, first of all, the time, and just following up from what Mr. Takalo and Mr. Omar said as well. We have, by the grace of God, we've been operating Muslim Hands Family for over 30 years now. So there's been a great deal of learning over those years, and no doubt we've made mistakes, not intentionally, but we live and we learn, and we have monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning that constantly takes place through our global network. We're working in over 30 countries around the world, of course, including in South Africa. So there's a wealth of learning that comes together through our global operations, and we're attempting to upscale and look at good practice that we've had from various places around the world, and to give some examples within South Africa. What we are hoping to further invest in 2024 is towards our vocational training centers. I agree with what Mr. Omar said, and Mr. Takalo earlier as well, that sometimes it's just putting a band-aid on the problem. We're not addressing the root causes. So one of the things we're looking to do is expand that. So in terms of skills training, be it in computer literacy rates, for electricians, welding, driving courses, cooking, as well as, of course, continuing the open kitchens, which are those soup kitchens and food parcels and hot meals distribution. But again, from a faith perspective, one of the things certainly we'll be looking to lever going into 2024 in South Africa is to work, more in the corporate social investment. So turning to philanthropists, bearing in mind that, the meaning of that is actually the love of humanity. And that's what we'll be encouraging our supporters and our donor base in South Africa and worldwide, that to continue and increase our love of humanity, to share from what we've been given. And that's a message, as a faith-based organization. We read very early, that God tells us that, and from what we have given them, they spend freely. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he encouraged all Muslims and people of humanity. He said, "Khairun nasi anfa'uhum lin-nas," that the best of humanity, the best people of God's creation, are those who serve people the most, who bring them the most benefit. And we believe that we're representatives of God here on earth. And, I want to give a positive message as we move into 2024, that we just need to take that sense of responsibility more carefully and more clearly. And those of us who have been blessed with more wealth than others, we know and we should know that we have a responsibility to care for our fellow man and woman and child, be they in rural areas in South Africa, where clearly the situation is deteriorating, the levels of poverty and hunger sadly are increasing, which tells you there's something wrong. And I would absolutely urge the philanthropists within South Africa, as well as our donor base across South Africa and worldwide, to give from what they've been given. That this is a blessing from God that we believe, and we haven't been given it so that we can increase the levels of houses that we have and the cars that we drive, but no, to share that wealth with our common man. And we're very much looking forward to an exciting year in South Africa, where we'll help to alleviate some of the root causes of poverty, whilst at the same time, of course, continuing to provide those hot meals, to provide the bread, to provide emergency food parcels to families who are desperately in need in rural areas, where we're already working in Cape Town, in Durban, as well as in Gauteng.
Absolutely, and in the spirit of Mr. Shah's final comments, Mr. Omar, Mr. Dagalo, in a minute or so, do you have any final message for our viewers on this Day of Goodwill and for this festive period? Mr. Omar, we can start with you.
Okay, thank you. So for some of us who have been Christian and have been brought up in Christianity, and which I think is also the same with the Muslim faith, is that the best way to show love is to share the little that you have. So I believe Christmas period, or this period, is a period of sharing. And I hope in the spirit of Ubuntu, which means that we have to ensure that each and everyone is fed, all of us can ensure that with the little that we have, just to show love in this period, but to also continue with that, to be our neighbor's keeper, literally, to ensure that the neighbor doesn't sleep hungry. You do not need to be in your air-conned house, like Mr.
Indeed.
The previous speaker said, while the neighbor is wallowing in poverty. The video that we saw at the beginning is quite traumatizing, to think that some of us could be so privileged to stay in the air-conned houses, and others are even going to the extent of taking their lives as a result of poverty. So I think this is the period to share, and we should show our Ubuntu in full. Thank you.
And Mr. Dagalo, just to round off with you, we're sadly running out of time, but your final thoughts.
My final thoughts are, look, from the point of view of South African Red Cross Society, we are primarily formed for alleviating human suffering. So anything and everything that suggests that there's going to be an impact with regard to how a fellow man is going to suffer, we actually formed to alleviate that. But also, I'll also echo the same sentiments and say, there's no greater fulfillment that you'll get as a human being than, looking after your fellow men. So if you can start with the people, your immediate neighbors, your immediate people that you live with, even including within your relatives and all of that, when you start there, it can only, become better by looking out for people that are actually in society out there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dagalo. Thank you very much to my panel for your thoughts and for the excellent work that you all do. Thank you for joining us on Unfiltered. The spirit of solidarity, charity, Ubuntu runs through our blood as South Africans. And as we celebrate with our families at this festive time, let us also remember those not fortunate enough to do so. Remember to stick with Unfiltered Views, Unfiltered News, and Unfiltered Conversations, and we'll see you for the next installment. Have a good evening.